I was fortunate enough to speak to quite a few people that have known you over the years.
I heard that was cool. That was cool.
Yeah, and I was just listening to some of the recordings of those conversations, like Nizam.
Yeah.
He's your childhood best friend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cal, who's your photographer and videographer.
Yeah, love Cal.
Throughout the years. And Lottie, who's your youngest sister, 6 years younger.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that one of the things they all came back to is that you really haven't changed.
I appreciate that. It gives me goosebumps. I like,
yeah, but that's what they said.
Like
your best friend from childhood said that's one of the most remarkable things, that you're still made out of the same stuff and you've never turned around and thought you were anything more than you were back then when he knew you.
And that's one thing I love about him, as a friend. I'd never say this to his face. But, he's a real guy. Like, he's never turned around to us and ever said, oh, I'm this big shot now, or that ego, that's never played, and he's never been embarrassed of us. He's a real guy.
It's at least 50% conscious that, or at least it started out as that idea. Because I think when you enter a crazy situation and One Direction being like the pinnacle of that idea, there's people around you that all of a sudden feel that used to feel really, really similar, and all of a sudden they feel really different. I'm not talking about day-to-day conversation, but I'm talking about stuff that we can relate to, problems that I might have had, that I might, talk to them about. And I think that's quite an alienating feeling. So instead of kind of just submitting, I've always resisted that. It's been really important to me. And those kind of things, hearing that and hearing other people say that about me, that does make me really proud, because it's definitely, it's definitely a lifestyle that can kind of sweep you away. But I think the other side of that and getting swept away, I don't really like the idea of what that might look like. And I think you need people around you that are going to tell you if you're being a dick, like vitally important in this job, definitely. And those things, I think when you're surrounded, like a lot of successful people are, when you're surrounded only by success, it breeds a funny kind of narrative. To be respected from people in Doncaster like that means a lot to me, definitely. So that's another reason why, I wouldn't drive through the streets of Doncaster in a fucking Ferrari or whatever.
And you went to school in Doncaster, Hayfields?
Yeah, Hayfields, where I did most of my time, and then I failed my A-levels and then went somewhere else for a year.
You failed your A-levels?
I failed my A-levels, yes. That was the first time I'd ever got a real bollocking off my mum, a real dressing down, because she was really, really fair, but there was something that she was kind of strict on with schoolwork. And I remember getting in the car and she said, "You fucked your life up." And she never swore. And I remember, I got goosebumps thinking about it there. I remember thinking, maybe I need to do something with my life.
At 15 years old, 15, 16 years old, you joined a drama group. And I was watching actually just before you arrived. At 17 years old, you got the lead role in Grease. The foundations were set and you ultimately at 18 years old decide to go and audition?
Yeah, that was the third time I auditioned for the X Factor. So every year previous to that. So that would have made me 16 when I first auditioned. There's like 3 producer auditions and then you get to see Simon, it's the main one. And the first year I didn't get through any of them. The second year I got through the first round. And then for a final time I said to myself, well, I'm going to give this one more shot. Because that was another thing at that age. It's one thing saying you're resilient, and I do think I am, but it's a lot easier to be resilient at that age as well, definitely.
It's really surprising that someone would go to X Factor once, be rejected essentially, go again, not make it, and then go again without having their self-esteem or their confidence knocked to the point where they go, I'm not going to go through that again. Because every time you got to come home, you got to tell your friends and family it didn't work out. Yeah,
well, the first year I can remember it being utterly crushing. Like, I'd not really had real rejection at that point. I hadn't really experienced that kind of thing. The second time I went was even more challenging because I went with what I'll describe as like the hottest girl at school at the time, right? So she's also a singer. We got talking like months ago. Turns out she wants to audition for the X Factor as well. I'm like, well, let's go together, thinking this could be like a smart little play. She goes before me, and I think at this point, I feel like I was still in the queue, and she showed me that she got through to the next round. It was like a gold ticket. I then didn't get through, and then because I was with her, I was traveling with her, we then got ushered into a room of, say, 200 people, and every single person in the room had a yes. I remember that being really, really challenging. You're just surrounded by people that are dreaming, they're really, really excited about what does the next stage look like, and that created a bit more fire, I think. It was like, okay, how do I get on the right side of this next year? How do I How do I be in this group of people next year?
Did your mum play a role in you going for that third year?
I can't remember specifically, but I would say if I would have had any level of doubt, 100%, the musical that you just referenced that I did at school, I didn't want to go to that audition, and she literally picked me up and drove me there. And I was so thankful that she did. She was often very, very good at, you know, pushy parents are that's not good. She was never like that. She always had the right amount of force, you know? Because sometimes you need that as a kid, and especially, actually, even as adults, you know, in a situation where you're second guessing something, as soon as someone goes, go on, you can do it, you're okay. So I think that definitely played a big role in that. Even if I suggested that I wasn't going to go to this audition, throughout the year, she will have been giving me 100 different reasons to go. Now, not literally, but just from a confidence point of view, the way that she was talking to me, how she always just put me on this amazing pedestal. She made me feel like I could do anything, definitely. And I think that helps in those kind of situations, going for it for a third time, because my mum's saying I can do it, so maybe I can.
So you do the audition where you saying, make you feel my love.
That was boot camp. So that was the second part of the audition. My first audition was a song called Hey There Delilah. Did nothing for me, like sonically. Like obviously now I can say this because I've got a bit more experience, but as a young lad, you're not thinking about any of these things. It was just, I like that song, I'll sing that song. It was bad. It was really, really bad. And to the point where like, it still makes me deeply uncomfortable, like listening to or watching that audition. The only thing I'd done like this is the school production of Grease, and that was to about 250 people over 2 nights, and that felt like a fucking mountain of people. Cut to then your live TV audition at the MEN in Manchester, and there's 3,000 people in the audience. 3,000 people is a big gig for anyone to play, like full stop. Like if you do 3,000 tickets, you're doing really, really well. So like it's the definition of being thrown at the deep end. And I think that's part of what they want. But it's not going to yield the best results from everyone. Some people it is, but I just remember feeling like a fucking deer in a headlights, like really, really shaky, like really, really, just felt really, really uncomfortable. I just wanted the ground to swallow me up. I'd never been in a situation where I was quite a confident young lad, so it wasn't very often I'd even been out of my comfort zone like that. And I just felt like a deer in the headlights, definitely.
Am I right in thinking that they probably had the idea to construct a band much sooner than...
They must have done.
You know
what I mean? Have done. Knowing Simon, I will have had these conversations with him in the past, but can't remember now. But knowing Simon, yeah, I think, you know what he's like, right? He will have had that in his mind for at least for the year before.
He loves a boy band as well. He's got a track record.
Yeah. They make him a lot of money.
And so you come third on the X Factor as a band when you were put together, and then you signed at 19 years old to Simon Cowell's Psycho Music. And it's crazy because when I think about you signing at 19 years old and I think about what happened in the preceding 5 or 6 years, I mean, it is crazy.
It's only now outside of being in One Direction that I actually have a little bit of a concept of what happened and even, you know, the craziness of it, because nobody has any context to it before it happens. So we definitely, we felt like things were going really, really well. But we also... there will have been part of us, especially in that first year, of just assuming this is what, you know, success looks like. You know, a successful artist does these things. And the first moment that I remember distinctly, actually, that I realized that maybe this was bigger than, like, let's say, like the average thing at the time. We got booked on a support gig with a Disney band called Big Time Rush. And before that tour show, our manager, but our like senior manager, the kind of guy you only see, you know, like 6 gigs a year, and it just happens to be Vegas and LA and all the best places in the world, you know. And he sat us down, it was like this dressing down, and it was like, look, this is what you need to expect from a gig like this. I expect people to only know the singles, and even if they know the singles, you know, like that's a real win. They're not going to know the words to the album tracks. It's going to be a very, very different show to what you expected. So we're all ready to go out fighting, because we'd not really had that at that point. We'd had most things that we'd done, we felt really confident doing. So like we were kind of going on the back foot. And then I can remember when we walked out on stage, and I think we opened with something that wasn't a single, and people were just locked in, like massively locked in. And it was really, really fucking loud in there. And I think that was a moment where I remember, again, I had this kind of side to me when I was younger. I was so excited to tell Richard, who was our manager at the time, I was so excited to tell him post-gig about how it actually went. Did you see it then? Because that was obviously not how it played out. And I remember feeling pretty smug about that. But I think it was once I kind of got to bed that evening, I was kind of thinking, I don't know, I wasn't an overly deep thinker at that point, but I was still thinking occasionally on a deep level. And I'm looking at this music manager and I'm thinking, like, this guy's like uber experienced. Like, he's been in this situation countless times. So if he was to predict it wrong, like maybe he did, I'm like, well, maybe maybe something is happening.
How do you take care of yourself amongst that? Because, you know, one of the things I've learned from doing this podcast is I've learned so much about the brain. I've learned so much about dopamine and sleep and circadian rhythms and all these things. And so when I fit that into the context of what your life was like at an age where these neuroscientists tell me that the male brain is still growing, it's still forming itself, you're putting this tremendous external pressure on it. You're like shocking it every night. I remember when I interviewed Liam, your former bandmate, him telling me that he would like he remembers walking out on stage, and I think it was Dubai. There's like 100,000 people there, and then thrown in. You probably remember the gig, like thrown into the taxi, taken back to the hotel room, and locked in there. And he was like, I remember him saying to me, it was stage, car, hotel, locked. Stage, car, hotel, locked. Like, fuck.
I would say that the way that we both handled it, me and Liam, was quite different. I think that's often why I had a good relationship with Zayn from early on, because neither of us are kind of rule abiding, and not in a way that's like utterly disruptive. It's just we have our own ideas, you know, and that at least alleviated a little bit of the pressure, knowing that deep down, if I wanted to just go and do something, I would genuinely just go and do it. Whereas I think Liam and the other boys, actually, to a degree, there was an element of a little bit of fear, I think, you know, and also Liam had, you know, he'd worked so hard from the age of 14 to get there. Liam's journey was a lot different to mine. I just felt like a happy-go-lucky guy who won the lottery, you know, like, whereas Liam was very, very precise and deliberate, and he'd got there for all his hard work. So I think we also came from a slightly different point of view. Another benefit that I had during that time, and I still have, is I'm not a dweller. Like, I'm an overthinker for sure, but I wouldn't say like I'm a dweller. So I wouldn't use this phrase with me very often, but like there's definitely an element of ignorance is bliss during that whole time.
I find it so fascinating that you talk about this idea of you having the minerals or the personality where you would push back against the system a little bit. Because when I spoke to your former cameraman and videographer, he said that you were the one in the group that stood up against the label. So you'd be the one to turn around to the record label and say, we need a day off. And it's interesting again, because I was, one of the things I learned from doing this podcast is this idea of like learned helplessness and control and autonomy. Basically, TLDR it says that people who feel like they have control have much better physiological health outcomes. They have less stress, they're more insulated, better psychological states, less anxiety, less depression, because they feel like they're in control of the situation. So there's this crazy study that I was reading about when I was writing my last book about these rats, where they learn that they can't do anything about the situation, and they basically give up and they become submissive and they stop trying. And I think about this in the context of humans as well. And you're from what your videographer told me, Cam, you were clearly not that. You were clearly someone that would push against Simon Cowell's record label as a young man.
Yeah, and that's something, I've had a few conversations with my friends, similar things about this, and I'm not certain where that was like inspired by, because it's brave, right? To stare someone who at the time, at least in pop, was one of the most successful people in the music industry and say, no, you've got it wrong. Here's me, an 18-year-old with no experience, telling you you've got it wrong. I think what gave me confidence in those ideas is, even if it wasn't a collective voice, even if it was just my voice delivering the message, it was always with collective intention. It would always be for the good of all of us. Making those decisions now on my own, they're not quite as easy. There's a lot of different kind of things at play, but and again, it kind of comes from that big brother kind of role again. I was the oldest in the band. It was kind of my role in the band, I think, to kind of to do that. And I realized that by far I was the most opinionated in the band, definitely. So I think I wanted to use that for good and not just chatting shit about someone on Twitter or something. Another important distinction about One Direction is, this is not like disrespectful to Ed. Like, I appreciate I was in a boy band, I know that, right? But like, if there would be like one genre of music that I would think might be the most naff, it's boy band, if you could call that a genre. So going into One Direction when I was 18, you know, growing up in the north of England, it's like real, it's kind of like snobby musically, you know, there's like real music and then there's boy bands, you know. So having that kind of feeling going into it, it was that was why it was easy to kind of push against some of these old school ideas, because they were the ideas that the reasons I didn't like these bands is because they all looked the same and because they all felt very kind of PR pressed, you know. It was always a really interesting project for me to try and to look at One Direction and think, well, how could we make this a little cooler? I remember the real turning point in One Direction was when we put up the pre-order for our first single, What Makes You Beautiful. I can't remember the number of how much we sold that week, but we broke some record, right, at the pre-order, and we got told this, and we'd not released any music at this point. And I remember thinking, that's fascinating, because they don't know what it's going to sound like yet, but they're invested. That felt like power early on. And it also felt like that we could rewrite the rule book because people were invested in us as much, if not more, than the music. I think that's fair to say.
Was there a part in the evolution and the journey of One Direction where you had that moment where you go, there's elements of my life that I love that I no longer have access to because of this success?
I would say that it's more gradual than that, really. You know, you start to lose some of your own independence to a degree. And then I think also the age I was, right? So like I was 18 when I first joined the band. And I always say this, that year of my life before I auditioned for the X Factor, at least up to those 18 years, was the best year of my life. You know, you've got independence at that point. I was driving. You could go out. Like it was so fascinating socially. There's always something to do. So to leave that behind was quite gutting, actually. And that took me a second to get used to it first. Now, I always felt incredibly grateful and really excited every time I was doing something with One Direction. But any kind of time for reflection, I was really, really missing home. Like me and Zayn when we were younger, we had countless conversations of like, you know, should we just pack it in? Should we just call it a day?
Why?
Because you feel alienated. You are living this lifestyle that, and there's a million different reasons, right? But like the fame thing's really difficult. And mostly for me, it was about being alienated. And I can't, like any of my life experience was now not so relevant to some of my friends, you know. And I think that also I think this is part of growing up in a working class town, but I have this like guilt for the success and money that I've earned as well. And I think that also is kind of part of the same thing. I think it's kind of like two different things. The fame thing, I'll never be okay with. Like if I, like, of course every artist says this, but if I could just do the music, you know, that would be amazing. That would be amazing. I suppose I could on a lower level, but I wouldn't get the same rush that I do. I think it's almost, it's almost everything else that comes with that.
It's interesting when someone says they felt isolated, which is something I've had a lot from people who've had great public success where they've got a big fan base, because we think of like isolation as not being around people. But I guess isolation in the context you describe it is more about connecting to people, relatability.
Yeah, but it's also like the metaphor would be like, what's that really famous crossing in Japan? If you took a drone shot and you pulled right out from that and you would just become a little dot amongst the noise. Sometimes that's kind of how it feels. Because also it's not the real world. You know, the even in the way that people perceive you is not the real world. The first moment that One Direction got, the first big pay packet was a merchandise deal that we got. And we always did really good merch.
How old were you?
19. That was the first kind of moment where I felt really, really excited. And so I rang my mum straight away and, you know, told her about it like I always would. And she was really excited for me. And obviously, you know, she's just proud. That's it. And then I remembered the feeling of, but who else do I tell now? Because, like, do I call up Nizam and tell him? Well, he'll be into that and he'll be really proud of me. But bear in mind, he's just seen me on the X Factor. And this is another thing I realized about people is they think if you're successful, then everything is just, successful and that's how it goes. So I think, if I didn't call Nizam, but if I had called him, he probably would have been really nice. But in his head, would have shrugged his shoulders like, well, obviously, things are going really well for you. So I think there's definitely a lack of understanding there, rightly so. There's also a guilt, especially at that age. People life's really, really expensive at that age. People are up to their eyes in student loans. It was only about 2 years ago that I put all the plaques up on my wall at home and my awards, like the Brit Awards and stuff that I got in the past from the band. They still annoy me even now in my lounge. Because if I'm having a conversation with someone, I don't even really want, I want to just be me. I don't want to be that guy that won those awards. We can be and we can conversate like that. But truthfully, if Nizam came over to my house for a chat and a coffee, I would hate that the conversation might end up then gravitating to me or my success. It's much more about just what those relationships and conversations look like in the real world. That's what I'm craving, is that real normality. All I want is to just be on an even playing field with everyone in any kind of conversation. I think that was the toughest thing to deal with, is just the lack of normality in every sense of the word.
If you could go back to the day that you signed the contract with Psycho, what is the advice that 33-year-old Louis would give 18, 19-year-old Louis?
That is a really, really big question. I think I would say to be confident in the earlier years, because the older I get, the more I realize most people in their earlier years of doing said thing are, to a degree, faking it. And I think for a long time, I was just thinking, well, I didn't spend my life as a young lad thinking I was going to be a singer, so I'm playing catch up and all those things. And there's another thing I'm more than comfortable enough to say. I'm not the best singer in the world. I'm okay with that, right? But there was definitely a time where those things were challenging as a young lad. And I think I would just cut myself a bit of slack as a young lad, because it's been a lot of my defiance and decision making that's got me to where I've got, and that should give me confidence. So I think as a young lad, I did really just felt like a deer in the headlights, and didn't really have any kind of context of what was going on. And I think when I'm talking about these things, I'm not talking about no, we're not going to do this Disney performance because I don't think it looks good for One Direction. I'm talking about more introspective, personal worth within the band, all those kind of things. I really, really struggled with that as a young lad, big time. So I would say I would give myself a bit more credit there.
You really struggled with that.
I found it really tough. So as I said before, I was the kid who won the lottery. I sang my first audition for the X Factor. I didn't feel like I did a good job. Was really surprised that I got the 3 yeses. Now, that was maybe 4 months before the first auditions air. So I've told everyone at this point, obviously. I'm in a band, I'm on the X Factor, and I have told anyone that will listen, everyone. And actually neither me nor Niall got any TV time on our audition. So the irony is we get put in this band, but people have no idea we are. There's no context for the viewers to actually see this and actually really care. I felt like I was playing catch up from that moment in. I remember this really real naff typical X Factor thing. We went filming for the judges' houses, which is the stage. You have the auditions, then boot camp, judges' houses, live shows. And we went filming for judges' houses. And I was already questioning. I wasn't really singing at all. I had not had any individual thing to sing. It was all harmony stuff. And I got stung by a sea urchin, right? Random story. My foot blew up like an elephant. And we had to film all this, you know what X Factor's like, right? We had to film all this jeopardy. This how will the boys audition without Louis? It was awful. It was awful because there was no credibility to that statement. The boys could have auditioned straight away. At that point, I was doing a lower harmony, and I would be shocked if anyone could even hear me in the mix at that point. So that was really challenging where, I'm already starting to feel those things, and then you get something like that that's quite literal, and they're trying to sell this jeopardy. And I remember thinking, I wanted to do more. I just didn't know how to do that. Again, there's no context. I thought I was a good singer before I went on the X Factor. Then I get through the audition. They put me through. I'm like, okay, well, I must be all right. Then they don't show the TV audition. You're like, oh, maybe that's like a personality thing, or I don't know, maybe it is my voice. And there's a lot of, especially as a young lad in this situation, there's a lot of unanswered questions.
Did you ever ask those questions?
Did I ever ask him why I was in that band? No, I would love to though. I would have loved to. But do you know why I would never with him? Simon would probably, Simon was always very brilliant at making me feel like worthy in the band. But as you said before, like I was often a voice between the band and the label. He was the label. Well, you put me on side, and that's a smart move, isn't it? One thing he would always do, Stephen, is he would always say my name. Now, when you're a 19-year-old lad and Simon Cowell says, do you know what the thing is about that idea, Louis? You are empowered. Now, we like people using our names. Now imagine that's Simon Cowell and you're 19 years old. There is a spell that comes with that, and there's a power that comes with that. And I think for a long time, I kind of fell for all those kind of ideas. Now, I think Simon, again, is an interesting person. He is a brilliant businessman. Now, I learned a lot from him. I still deeply respect him. And I was in awe of him as a young lad. I loved to be around him. I loved to listen to him make decisions and all of that. And I thought he was definitely brilliant at that time. He built me up on a pedestal to the point where I thought that it would actually have a real world meaning, not just a thanks darling kind of vibe.
When did you realize that it didn't?
When I joined Psycho on my own.
So this is after the band.
Signed a sorry. So the band split up, and now I didn't have my pick of record labels. It was never like that. But even if I could have had 10 offers on the table. Let's just assume they're all the same money. I would have picked Simon always, because, like, again, a little bit like the north of England, loyalty is like a really important currency. It really is in these kind of, working class places. It's really, really vital. And I think, like, for me, that always meant a lot to me. So I thought, well, I'd heard that some of the other boys were thinking about going to other labels, they were right to. And I found out I was the only one that was going to stay with him, and that just motivated me more. So all the other boys went and joined different record labels, some of them not even within labels that were in Sony, which Psycho was part of. And I remember thinking, oh, wow, this is it's amazing for me, actually, that all the boys have done that. Because, look how good this makes me look to Simon. I look really loyal. And some of it was, deliberate, but mostly that's just how I am as a person. I would rather just keep the happy family kind of vibe. That suits me.
One of the things people don't talk about is the impact that your success has on everyone else back here in Doncaster, including your mum. I spoke to your sister, Lottie, my team did, and I was listening to the recordings, and she said that it was especially hard for your mum because you leave home suddenly at 18 years old, and from everything you've described, you're more than just a kid to her. You were, in some respects, a partner in raising the family.
And best mates as well, man. Yeah, definitely.
Did she ever speak to you about the impact it had on her, all of that?
That's something I can remember really clearly. And she used to do the university analogy. And she used to say, I knew you were going to leave home at some point, but I had at least a timescale to that. I could work towards in my head, okay, in 3 months' time, he's going to leave for uni, and that's that. One Direction never happened like that. It all ran away with itself. So I think it felt like we all blinked, and before we knew it, I was no longer living at home. So my mum had no time to even grieve that idea of and just for context, I mentioned this I made a film and documentary, and it kind of sums up me and my mum's relationship perfectly. The first person I told when I lost my virginity was my mum. I was, as if I was telling one of my lad mates, and I wasn't telling her for any other reason other than to show off and be like, guess what happened today? and we definitely had that kind of energy together. I always saw her more as a best friend than anything else. And especially because I was her first, she had me when she was 19. We spent the first few years together without a male role model. So it was a little deeper than your average, son and mother situation. So I think it really hit me mum like a ton of bricks. If I had my time again, I would have been more present and aware of those kind of ideas. And here's a story actually. I've never told Daisy and Phoebe this. Daisy and Phoebe are two of my sisters who are identical twins, and they're about 4 or 5 years younger than Lottie, so they're about 21. Now, I could always tell them apart perfectly, but they look utterly identical, these two, especially when they were really young. And I can remember the more time I spent at the band, the more time I spent away from home. I wasn't confident enough to use their name to them. You know, it would be always like, oh, babe, or like, you know, something that way I wouldn't have to mention the name. Because I wasn't certain who was who. These are two sisters that I spent my life with and grew up with. But I think shows just how little I was at home. And if my mum would come out to see me, which was great, but other, you know, the kids were at school and stuff like that. So there was a long time for those 5 years we're in the band, a long time spent not spending enough time with family. And that, I would say that was 85% the job and the situation and One Direction and stuff. And then 15% me too. Like I could definitely have done more like that. But you know, when you live in a life like we did in One Direction, free time is so competitive. And when you're young, you're not smart enough to realize the value of this family time.
And you were on an absolute rocket ship up until you must have been, 23, 24 years old when the band announces that it's breaking apart. So in March that year, Zayn says he wants to leave to have a normal 22-year-old's life, which shocked the world. How do you reflect on Zayn's decision now? Because were you pissed off at the time that he was breaking things up, or?
I was fuming.
Really?
I was, again, it's not something we've discussed enough yet, but me and Zayn, but again, it comes back to like loyalty for me. And I just, selfishly, I'd wished he'd had a conversation with me first. Because me and Zayn, I'd like to think that he would say this too. I think he would. There was times where like we were like, let's put it like this, is a good way of describing it. On the last tour that Zayn did, we always said we would never be this band, the type of band that would have all their own individual dressing rooms. Well, sometimes when you've got a lot of guests and stuff, it can be challenging, but we always said we wouldn't be that band. And on the last tour Zayn did, Harry had his own dressing room, Liam did, Niall did, and me and Zayn shared. So I think I kind of like testament of the relationship. So I felt a little bit hard done by. I felt like not like throw these boys under the bus, but let me know. But I just a little bit. I thought that we had a relationship where he could have had that conversation with me. In reflection, and he hasn't told me this, we'll see when I chat to him about it. But I think if he told me, I would have tried to tell him to stay. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why he didn't, because he knew I was always very opinionated.
So how did you find out?
That evening, the night before we found out, everything was normal. We're in the hotel room. We were somewhere, I don't know where, somewhere in the world, maybe where weed isn't legal, but we were having a joint. And everything was normal, you know, and then I think he maybe left at like 11. He was cool, wasn't like in a bad mood or anything like that, you know, good night, lad. And then the next morning I woke up, we had a shoot with like Coca-Cola for some sponsor thing. And we found out that he wasn't coming. Now, like I had this in me too, but like Zayn was quite prolific for it. Like this wasn't out of the ordinary. Like if Zayn, I always rated him for it. If he didn't want to do something, like he literally wouldn't do it. Like you name the thing, it doesn't matter. He just, if if it's not right for him, then he won't do it. So I think, well, that's probably why he left the band, you know. And that's what I admire about him, because if I was in his same situation, I would have probably put 6 plasters on it just to hope that we can stay playing Happy Families, you know. I want to know if he regrets it. Not in the way that, like his own personal success has been incredibly successful and he's done really, really well like that. But he must miss it. Like he must do, because I know Zayn really well, and Zayn has a bit of the kind of energy I do in such a way that sometimes this whole job can just be a little bit fussy. It's just a bit fussy in general, you know. There's just a lot going on like that. Now, when you're in a band, you can share that wealth. It's like, you know, say you're sat in an interview you're not enjoying. You just kind of shut up a little bit and let someone else pick up the pieces and they'll do that role. We could share the things that we didn't like to do as much. So there must definitely be times that he misses the comfort of that, for sure. But it's kind of like the elephant in the room, to be honest. It's not, I've met up with him a couple of times recently, but it's not often something we'll discuss. But there'll be a time for that, for sure. I would like to have those conversations with him. But it crushed me, man. It absolutely crushed me. I was devastated because it felt like, oh, is this the beginning of the end of the band? But then also I'm like, this is like my best mate in the band at the time. So I'd lost a friend and someone in the band.
Funny, you know, I've heard you say that you weren't prepared for the success of One Direction, but you also weren't prepared for the end of One Direction.
Oh, no.
And you describe it as hitting you like a ton of bricks.
Yeah, it was awful. It wasn't until after the event that I realized that I actually computed all of these feelings, but it was like I was straight grieving for it. That was grieving the band. I'm someone who unfortunately has a little bit of experience in grief, and albeit it felt different, but it was a version of the same thing. It was something that I really wanted that couldn't have anymore. I think like anything like that, you know, like if you're like I'm a glass half full kind of guy. So like I felt the wheels start to turn in motion like that. But you're looking the other way. You're like, no, it's fine. It's not going to play out like that. It's never going to come to that, whatever. And then we had a meeting one day and it did.
What happens in that meeting? What's said? Is it Simon saying something? Is it the boys? Is it representatives?
It was us boys, which was great. Always how it should be like that, obviously. But I think it almost might as well have been representatives. What's really fascinating is those real serious moments. We wouldn't have a lot of them in One Direction. We were just kind of going with the flow and really happy, you know, for each other and stuff like that. But I think those kind of moments where you have to be selfish, it was an atmosphere that I never really felt in the band. Because normally, like I said, we're arm in arms. It's all this camaraderie. And then all of a sudden you get someone thinking more independently and more for themselves, which, by the way, they have every right to do, of course. But it just felt, the room felt cold that day. I can remember that in particular. I'm trying to find the right metaphor for it, but it was something where these are all the same faces that I've seen every single day, but I'd never quite felt an energy like that in the room. There was this emptiness. And I think probably because we all knew collectively where it was going, you know, and that's probably some friction between those ideas. The thing that really bothered me was, and this again is naive, was so naive at the time, but I was adamant on having some kind of indication of, because it was originally said as, what's that fucking word we've used a million times? Hiatus.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, is just such a cringy word. So it was originally pitched as that. So I was thinking, I remember saying like, well, if I'm going to try and do some stuff on my own, and at this point I didn't even know what I was going to do, I was like, it'd be good to know how long this break's going to be for. So like, let's speculate. A year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? I never really got an answer to that question, which I understand now, because truthfully, I don't think the people or person involved was brave enough to answer that question deep down. I think they probably knew the reality, and that's why it was tough.
And does Simon try and persuade you back into the band?
Let me say that by this point, and I'd say Simon was aware of this, but maybe not quite so aware. Because we're a band, after about 2 years of One Direction, absolutely nobody could tell us shit. Now, we were nice boys. We were never like rude or anything like that. But like, so like if Simon had like, we didn't have that, he might have had that relationship prior, like back in the 90s when all that stuff was kind of prevalent. But I think we'd always had our own kind of confidence like that. So he was never involved in those kind of decision makings. In fact, he was smart enough to realize that would rub us up the wrong way.
Makes sense. And then it ends, and your life goes from absolutely crazy to less crazy.
Yeah, it's still something that I'm unpacking still, to be honest, and still trying to work out all of those kind of things. I remember, something I spoke about before, but Julian Bonetta, who is a producer who worked on a lot of the One Direction stuff, we had a great relationship with him. Really cool guy. We had this crazy night at, it was like some kind of Billboard Awards in Vegas. Julian, he pulled me aside and he said, and it was like really, it's funny because he's not really like this heavy, but it's a real heavy statement. He'd obviously had a few vodka Red Bulls or something. And he was like, where do we go from here? Now, by the way, the we upset me a little bit. It's like I understand that and we are all in this together, but that question is a hell of a lot deeper for me than it is you. I understand, I get it, but at the same time, you're probably, and what he did end up doing is carrying on doing what he did. And I still don't really know the answer to that question. And in fact, maybe I don't think you can. I think a lot of people's, not everyone's, but most people's natural trajectory of, let's just call it success. I could make a pedantic argument for it not being specifically that, but you know, they have a kind of lineal journey. The older they get, the more successful that they get. What was really strange was being 24 years old and realizing that the only way is down from here. Like there is no alternative reality where I at least keep up or supersede. No way. There was no chance of that. And that wasn't, you know, it was very obvious. It was very obvious to anyone around it. And still is something that is challenging, definitely. Because you've had to look behind the curtain, you know. Now some of the things that maybe I had then that I don't have now, I'm not overly pressed for. Like a billboard for the album on, in LA or here in New York. Like I don't get those kind of opportunities anymore. Do I lose any sleep over it? No, not really. But I think the feeling in general of I have to work really hard to compete at the level I do. Like that is just a fact. Like I just got a #1 record on the last record on Faith in the Future. Never in a million years when I started my solo career did I ever think that I would be getting a #1 record. It's a testament to my fans, testament to the record, the producers, etc. But I've always had to work on my own anyway. I've always felt like I've had to work really, really hard just to kind of keep my head above water. Now, the reality of that statement is, and I realize that as I say it out loud, my version of head out of water or head above water is very different to a lot of people. Because from 18 to 24, that whole landscape looked very, very different. And that's why I've always found it quite unrealistic to not compare the two. I completely agree with that because you cannot compare them. The two being One Direction and my own solo career. But it's something that you can't ignore. I do a cover. Stupid of me to call it a cover. I realized how funny that is. When I do a One Direction song, I call it a cover, which is really ironic. But I do night changes on my tour show. And I can remember this one show in particular. I think it was like a 5,000 capacity room. And I think maybe we'd done like 1,200 tickets, which, is okay. That's all right. But when you're singing night changes at a gig like that, when you can vividly and visually remember singing night changes like that at, say, Wembley Stadium, and you're literally singing Look How Fast the Night Changes, and you're looking out to this sparse room, it's like a brutal kind of poetry. And that's the point about it being unrealistic, is I could be the most, and I could be the most glass half full guy in the world, but life is going to constantly challenge me like that, definitely, because that was the pinnacle.
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very human. Obviously, the example and the scenario you're talking about is one no one can understand. Mm-hmm. But it's the comparison is how we work. It's how we understand the value of things. Mm-hmm. And as you say, going to the top of Mount Everest at 24 means that you're always going to have some kind of sort of even unconscious comparison to everything thereafter. What do you do about that? Do you have to use a different yardstick of measurement? I try to. These are words, aren't they? Do you know what I mean?
That's it.
Being honest.
And some days I live by it. Some days I live by it, definitely. I wrote something on my social media probably like 4 or 5 years ago now, but it was on Instagram, I think, and about my interpretation of the word success, because I'd spent a long time and I only knew through the lens of One Direction. And I think that's a constant battle. It's a constant conversation with myself internally that I can measure my own success in a different way. It doesn't have to be a numbers game, In terms of like fulfillment, for example, and like, do it like this latest record that I've just written, like I feel really, really good about it. There's been an element of me kind of swimming against the tide a little bit to this point. It's like that, the feeling of fulfillment is like, that's legit.
Did you have conversations with your former bandmates about how they were coping with these?
Yeah.
Is it all different?
To be honest, that would only happen me and Liam. Like between the other boys, like not that it's not like emotional, because like it is, and it's definitely deeper than surface level, but it's more, I would struggle to text the other boys as much.
What?
I would love to hang out with them in person like that, but there's an element of it feeling, it's just all a bit small talk. Like, which is lovely and it's nice to catch up like that. But me and Liam would always speak on a much more deep level because, and I felt bad saying this because I feel arrogant, but I shouldn't. I wanted to look after him, definitely, Liam. Like that was like a role I feel like I was there to play. And like he definitely, often his, the way he would like perceive certain parts of his life, I would be really inspired by. Like he was someone who, really brave at times, which like contrary to sometimes what he put out, but Really, really brave. Like, he would ask anyone anything with a smile. And like, you know, he had a really good way about him like that. I would say he was the closest to being my brother. Love him deeply, could spend hours and hours and hours with him, but there was an element of always checking in and just making sure that like he's cool like that.
Did you worry about him?
Always, yeah. Because I knew he was a little misunderstood, but also, you know, like, interestingly, the record, when you're starting out as a solo artist, the parallels of people who know themselves make the best records. Definitely. So like, if you're still unpacking all that information of who you are as a person, as an adult, which we all were post One Direction, it's near impossible to point and go, this is who I want to be as an artist. Because essentially it's just a metaphor for who you are as a person, or at least the best stuff is. Liam will be someone who candidly I could say to him really honestly, like, bro, fucking hell, like, I miss being in the band. And we could like have a really honest conversation like that. Whereas, and I don't mean this in any kind of way, but if I'd said that to any of the boys, I'd be worried that they might think, oh, things aren't going well in his solo life, you know. Whereas Liam, I never had to worry about those things. It was like brothers like that.
He wore his heart on his sleeve, didn't he? So Liam was Liam.
Yeah, definitely. And I just it's really fresh. That it's a really, really cool way of living. Because we all say, even like I would like to say, I wear my heart on my sleeve, but you know, there's still 10% of me that's guarded in the right places. He certainly had his way of being. I
do, like, as we were saying earlier, I do wonder if that made him slightly more susceptible to the pressures, because sometimes, you know, if you can put on a second face,
yeah,
if you can't,
yeah. What's helped me in this job, and there's no truer time that kind of shows itself. It's me as a parent. There is a real distinction. This is me. There is me at work, and there is me not at work, basically. So either being a parent or being a friend or a partner or whatever. That's always helped me to have that kind of distinction of, you know, when I'm dad to Freddie, I'm full-time dad and I'm not a singer, you know, and any of that world outside does not really matter. It's not relevant to me as a father, which it isn't. You see, I've alluded to some of this stuff in the past, not really ever spoke about it in depth like this. And part of the reason for that is, and this is the correct forum and it makes sense, but part of the reason for that is I can't think of anything worse than being, what's the word? If someone like this was talking to me about this and I had not experienced that, I'd feel really sorry for them, naturally. I don't like that. I don't like those feelings. I don't like those ideas. I appreciate that it's weighty and people should, of course, feel sorry. But I think the reason that I'm always quite selective of when I talk about it is because I cannot have that define me. I can't. It's not fair to my family. It's not fair to Felicity. It's not fair to my mum. Like, I can't. And, you know, the problem is if we walked out of here and we just happened to get papped, right? In the article, the Daily Mail print, every single time they will write about this stuff, you know, like every single time. It could be me and you going to get a coffee and then, you know, they do that thing where it's like a 20% new article and then they just fluff out the rest of the 80% with basically the narrative that they want to push. But that's something that I can't escape, and I find that really frustrating because I'm not someone who is a glass half empty kind of guy. I don't want those kind of feelings and emotions. I empathize and understand with anyone hearing these stories. Of course, maybe you would feel bad for me. But I think my biggest worry in these kind of things is to not be defined by it. And an example of that would be when I released a song called Two of Us, which was a song that was written essentially about my mum's passing.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize by releasing that song how, it would open the floodgates to have many people kind of, you know, put a lot of their trauma on me as well, which is okay, but also creating this thing where anyone just feels like they could ask anything then. So I remember going on to BBC Breakfast News And it's one of those things, it's fucking early morning slot. Like, not even the presenters want to be there. Never mind me at that time. I'm not good with early mornings. Anyway, so I'm going on to talk about Two of Us, the single. Now, we distinctly said, you know what it's like. You know, these are the things that are okay to mention, and do not mention these things. Now, if I was going to go on and talk about what the song was about, then fair enough. You know, that's one thing. But I actually had a journalist at the time who asked me directly about those things, and I'd known that we'd said don't. Now, it's very different to be, like, sometimes on that list we might have don't speak about One Direction. Like, that this is not what I've got a problem with. But when someone's had their own grief and you're still then going to ask those kind of questions, I think I find that really, really troubling. And I think what was interesting was I left the interview, and I used to be good at this when I was a bit younger, and I obviously took to Twitter and was like, never fucking working with the BBC again, blah, 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 blah. And then he came back at me, this journalist. He said, well, if you write a song about grief, expect to be asked about it. And my instinctive reaction was, there's somebody who hasn't experienced grief. They couldn't possibly have. Because if they had, they wouldn't make such a horrible, horrible comment that just lacks all kind of empathy. So I think it's those kind of moments where I'm quite guarded with this kind of information, just because I think, as I said, I think a lot of people, if I never spoke about it, I don't carry myself as someone that looks like they're really hurting. At least I hope I don't. I don't think I do.
Do you know what this sounds like a crazy thing for me to say, but I had no idea.
Okay, right, yeah, okay, yeah.
So we met at Soccer Aid.
Okay, right.
I had no
I like
idea.
that. Okay, that makes me feel good, actually.
And, you know, it's just me being honest. I had no idea. I'm not someone that, I don't really read newspapers. I don't stay close to tabloid stuff. I had known Liam, but Liam hadn't spoken to me about these things. I'd met you, we'd hang out for a couple of days at Soccer Aid. I had no idea.
Yeah, okay.
And it was only in researching your story and your background and understanding where you've come from and really what inspires a lot of the music and different things like that I started to understand these things. So you're certainly not someone that carries yourself in with any particular identity. Really, that's that one could discern, other than just being a normal guy. And the other thing that connects us it was Liam. And I think it would have been Liam's birthday a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
His birthday was 3 days off mine. So his 29th of August, I believe, and mine's the 26th. And we both, I knew him a little bit. You knew him an awful lot. And he passed away while on holiday in Argentina. I mean, yeah, I just couldn't believe it. And you to him, because he had told me, he talked about you all the time. Through the pandemic, I know you were doing things together, doing these live shows and stuff. And he would talk about you as if you were his best friend in the band all the time. And I guess that's you reciprocate that feeling with him, right? You were like especially thereafter the band, you know?
Definitely thereafter. I'd say, in the first couple of years, me and Liam used to speak about this. We kind of butted heads a little bit. Like I said before, Liam had been, he'd been working really, really hard since the age of 14 to get to where he was in One Direction. My journey wasn't like that. So there was definitely, if I wanted to do something and I might be going out late at night and then Liam might say something along the lines of, we've got a photo shoot at 9 o'clock in the morning tomorrow. We never saw eye to eye on those kind of things, because I'm just like, well, I've got this amazing opportunity, so I'm still going to go out and, party or whatever. But I think Liam, he came from a very, very sensible point of view, but mostly because he'd given so much more time and energy to it by that point. Like as I said, yes, it was my third audition, but really they weren't too taxing, the moments of the rejection. I just got on with it and got through it, and it was fine. The only time X Factor was relevant to me was the times when I was auditioning those days. Whereas Liam, it became his life from 14 right up until 16. He'd sang at West Brom Stadium before any of us had done anything. When I put my post up about him, and by the way, it's just so utterly challenging that there are just too many words and too many memories. It could just be infinite, the post, I really wanted I really wanted him to be remembered the way that he should be remembered. But this, I could just go on and talk all day about how amazing he was. But I think we all looked up to him. If we were, I don't think I would have been brave enough to say at that age when I was in the band. I think I would have had too much pride. But we all looked up to him massively for like the reasons that I just stated. He was vastly experienced before any of us had done anything. He was also like the safest pair of hands, like in every sense of the word. So like vocally, interview, music video, like whatever it would be, and he'd be like working and doing it, like he would always be the safest pair of hands, where you maybe have me and say in the back, like either smoking a joint or doing something stupid. Liam would always have his eye on the ball, which ironically created more space for the, when you've got someone who's willing to pick up the pieces and you've got young lads don't reflect and go, oh, I can see he's picking up a lot of the pieces, I'm going to do a bit more for him. Well, no, you just see that. Like my role in the band might have been to be disruptive and have conversations with record labels and or management or whoever. And that was for me to be disruptive and go against the grain. Liam's role was the opposite, but equally, if not more important, to just keep everything going, and be that safe pair of hands of keeping everything in check. That's why from like a very young age, like he was called like the sensible one in the band, which I also don't think would have done him loads of favours mentally either.
He was wildly misunderstood. Big
time, man. Big time.
And oftentimes people maliciously misunderstood him.
Yeah.
Which was hard, it's hard. I don't know if I have the right words for this, but if you knew Liam Payne and then you went on the internet and saw the way that he was described when, certain moments in press, there was that interview he did in LA and things like that.
Yeah.
You could only feel awful that he was so poorly misunderstood, because he was often painted as being arrogant or whatever. But the reality of Liam is like the opposite of whatever the word arrogant is. Pure is the word.
Really nice way of describing him like that. And I don't mean this in a remotely rude way or derogatory way. He had a bit of puppy dog energy about him. Like he's just like, when you say pure there, that's what it makes me feel like. He's just the kind of guy that you might get a bit of banter wrong and it comes across a bit cutting and you see him go, oh, and you go, oh, fucking awesome.
Yeah.
He's just really want it to be liked. Now we all do, obviously, like that's in all of us, but I think for Liam, it was vitally important. But also he missed out on some of the social life, because from 14 to 16, he was actually working at that point. Like he was still at school and stuff, but his brain and his dreams, and probably every night that he went to sleep, he was thinking about how is he going to achieve what it is that he wants to achieve. So he definitely had a very different journey to all of us.
Where were you when you found out?
In the car in LA, and I just dropped, I'm pretty sure, again, my memory isn't good at these moments of time, but I think I just dropped Freddie off at school, my son, and we were just about to pull back up home. I think that's how it went down. It was actually, I found out through Niall. He told me, and then I think Niall said something like along the lines of, have you seen the news? And I knew as soon as he said that, kind of knew what it might meant, what he might have meant. I had the same feeling that I had with Felicity, and I think anyone has this when they're around someone who's struggling. My 150% wasn't nearly enough. And that's where it's my own arrogance thinking that I could have helped, really, because it was so much deeper than what I could have done for him. He was definitely, definitely struggling at that time in his life. And a lot of people said this, and it really resonated with me. It just, he never, if he could just see, just for 5 minutes, just live in your head or my head and see how we perceive him, he would be so shocked. He would be like, honestly, but like even the fact that you two were friends and I didn't know about that until you mentioned it at Soccer Aid, or maybe he mentioned it loosely. He would have loved that. He would have loved that. You would have been someone definitely that he would have felt really like proud to know, you know, and like because you come from also a very credible space, and that's something that was always really important to Liam. Business very, very important to Liam. So the fact that you saw him, like that would have meant the world to him, definitely. He very, very misunderstood. But I think also the fact that he was misunderstood is because he was, like I said before about all of our solo endeavors. When most bands or artists start out, they do a development stage for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 2 years. We had to do this development in the public eye post being in One Direction. Liam was still working so much out. So the fact that he might have been a bit misunderstood, you can't, you know, there's some things that people definitely can be judged for. But in terms of him occasionally coming across like that, you can't even judge people on looking because they just see what they see. But in reality, that's just someone navigating almost in the way that if you went down to university and just people watched for 2 months, you would see some stuff, you know, of people that were struggling with some things and whatever, or, you know, complete walking contradictions. You'd see someone in their first year who says that they swear by this brand and they'll never wear this brand, and the next year they'll be wearing said brand. When we're at that age, we're all still just working it out. So there's so much room to be misunderstood because you don't know yet, you know. And I think that was a tough thing for all of us, is working out who am I outside of Liam in One Direction, Louis in One Direction. Who am I and what does that look like? And that question's intimidating, really, really intimidating.
You lose a friend there, but you also, in some respects, it's grieving the band again, is it not? Is it not? You know what I mean?
It definitely brought up feelings like that. Look, there's now only 3 other people on the planet that can deeply understand my professional journey. Like, you never say never, right? But never, like, I can't ever imagine. I'm not sure it would be right to him. Like, say, sake of argument, 25 years time, it's like a fucking Oasis thing. They offer us an arm and a leg and they're like, come back and do this many shows. I don't know. Yeah, I think it just completely put a pin in all of that. And the irony is there was no one campaigning for One Direction to get back together more than Liam. And like, I would say I came in a close second, actually, like definitely. Another important thing to mention about Liam, which I thought was incredible. There's a time where I felt like me and Liam were professionally losing together. We were struggling to be solo artists and find true success, and we were kind of struggling together. And then Liam had little moments where he had like really successful singles and they streamed really well, and he'd like feel really good about that. But at that time, nothing was really working for me in my job. So I was really proud of him and I'd message him and stuff, and then not to the same weight, but kind of role reversed a little bit. And Liam was struggling a little bit more professionally, and I just started to understand the picture a little bit more, started doing more touring and stuff like that. And like, for example, when I made a documentary and a film about like my life after One Direction, and Liam came to the premiere. Now, I'll just say this because I was going to mince my words, but none of the other boys would have done that. Fact, boys out the band, the lads in One Direction. Would I have even done that? I would like to sit here now and say, yeah, I think I would, but I don't know, truthfully. And the point being that me empathizing how I was a couple of years prior to that, Liam was sat in a cinema watching a film about how I'd been successful in the last 12 months when he was struggling with his own things. And it's something that I'm not sure I would have been brave enough to do. I'm not sure the other boys would have. And basically all that is, to sum that up, is just utterly putting himself second. There's no way that wouldn't have had a certain kind of weight on him. Because as you said, we're all human and we naturally compare. So, you know, there might be things that were happening there that he was wanting for. And I think just the fact that he turned up on that day and was there for me, and I just did the role reverse in my head and imagined that. I just imagined how challenging that could be. And it's just a real testament to to Liam. And he couldn't have been more happy. And it's another great example, right, of this, of where the fucking internet it's just a horrible place at times. He put up, and luckily I know someone will have screenshotted it because he deleted it in the end, but he put up this beautiful post after my premiere for this documentary, like an essay, a fucking essay, like stuff that he's never said to me before. It was like the sweetest, nicest fucking shit. And then about 2 days later, he deleted it because the fans were just caning him for it, just saying that he was like, you know, bandwagon, kind of like, you know what it's like. It's a very small percentage of people, but they make a lot of noise, and sometimes it'll push you to a point of like even deleting a post. But that being an example of him just really putting himself second and really trying to say to the world how proud he was of me, and the end goal was more ridicule.
And same happened right when he was in Argentina. He was there watching Niall perform, and there was lots of similar narrative around his appearance there.
And all I would say in any regard like that, not just Liam, in any person like that, after you judge, because sometimes it's human nature to judge, after you judge, just give those things just a little bit more thought. So take the tour thing, for example, and he's at the tour show and people were making comments of how much he was loving the attention. On the surface level, that's someone who wants attention. If you just look a little bit deeper, that's someone who's just been in the biggest band in the world and wants those situations again, who hasn't had those live situations again and craves for them. The reason also Liam could be misunderstood is because he didn't really operate with a filter, you know? So he would just feel something, say it, and there you go.
I guess we should talk about the music.
Yeah.
Which I'm very excited to talk about. So you've been working on this album. And I think what's the important context we've had is I'm curious to know how much everything we've talked about today and the season of life that you've arrived at 33, you're now in love as well. Your girlfriend is set up there. From all the people I spoke to, you're very smitten. I think your friend from back home described you as being whipped.
Was that Nizam? Yeah. Sounds like him. That's funny.
And you went Instagram official.
Yeah.
I saw that post.
New territory for me, all that. Yeah, I'm learning on the job.
How does that all weave into the music, and how is the music different this time around? Like, what are you thinking going into the studio?
You know, all those things are so relevant. They are like, you know, personal life and how happy you are and fulfilled and content. All those things, of course, play into the record, definitely. I think because of, you know, a lot of the conversation we've just had, there's been a certain kind of weight to the music before now. Like I said, I wrote that song about my mum called Two of Us. And there's just a certain, I could imagine, you know, listening to my first record, like I'd be pretty exhausted after listening to it emotionally. It's like, fucking hell, just put in a couple of nice, happy, fun songs, you know. But it wasn't true to me at that time. So like, I think now I feel in a comfortable place to be like positive and like happy and confident. You know, that's one thing I was thinking about with this record is like my intention is just to maybe feel good. I know that's a really cliche and like obvious thing to say, but I'm not sure some of my other music did that. It made you feel, it was honest, it was painful at times, but it didn't feel that good. So I think now I've got this almost like a new sense of life, a new sense of happiness and purpose and fulfillment, all of those things. But also it's something I've, like the older I get, the more hippie I can get on these kind of ideas. And if I would use an analogy, on the last two records, I had a very small palette of paint of the colours I was choosing from. And a lot of them were kind of darker colours. Whereas on this record, it feels like the palette is a lot deeper. There is a lot more to say, but there's a lot more colour on there as well. That makes me feel really good because that I must feel good to make that record. You can't fake shit like that, or at least I can't anyway.
And how much does love come into all of this?
As I said, I'm like deeply romantic person. It's also easy to be romantic when you're a creative. You know, those two things are just, they're tight. But I think for me, I really struggle to write in a fictional sense. I really, really struggle. So like for me, I have to have been living it. It has to be literal. It has to be real to me. So if I wasn't feeling so good like right now, I wasn't feeling so in love, the record probably would have a slightly different feel to it. Just because it, you know, things like that are in everything that we do, I would say.
And what is success for you this time around? Like, we talked about the comparison and this and that and all these other yardsticks we can use. And
I'll tell you what success is. Success for me is actually successfully computing what the new idea of success is. So I know what my old idea is, but true success for me, and I'm not there yet, is getting to the point where I don't just say, this is my new version of success. I mean it implicitly. And what's really difficult is the music industry is an industry that is A, a numbers game, and B, competitive. Now you can pretend to have this different version of success and you can get there in the end. But the point being that like there are a million different tools in place to pull you to the other side.
yeah.
It genuinely shouldn't matter where my album charts. Let's just say like go for the UK, for example, where my album charts in the UK. It shouldn't really matter that much to me, but it does. I've not quite got there yet. And I think the irony is I just started to get there on the last record. And the last record, obviously, High Class Problem, I get that, went to number 1. And then all of a sudden I'm like, well, obviously I want it again now. So I started to have the answer for what the new thing of success looks like until I succeeded. I superseded my own idea of success. And then I'm like, oh, well then the barriers just changed. And then you're basically just playing the same game you were before.
Where are you in your journey of happiness? Like if you had to plot your life on a timeline of like, you know.
Oh, I like that because I never really thought about it like this and it makes me feel good. It feels like I'm on the home straight.
Okay, nice. Beautiful.
Like I feel like, truthfully, like obviously not what I would have told like my sisters like back in the day or my family or anything like that, but like it was more of a concept. The idea of me getting over this and being truly happy for a long time. It was like a concept as opposed to any kind of form of reality. It was like, oh, well, I'm sure, you know, logically that makes sense in my head, but will I ever get there? I don't know. I now feel worthy for the success that I've earned. And for a long time, I didn't know if I'd ever get there. And I would say this record, this album is the album that I always deserved to make. It's just I had to be brave enough to say, yes, I'm an artist. Yes, I'm a recording artist and I'm a touring artist and I'm a songwriter and all these things that sometimes just felt a little bit cringe to say out loud, weirdly. And I think part of the imposter syndrome, maybe. But the picture that was forever quite blurry looks a little bit more sharp now.
And I mean, the fans are waiting.
Yeah.
I saw the tweet you did the other day where you talked about the music and how confident you are and how you're feeling about it. And the response underneath that post was just insane. Absolutely insane. The energy is there and, people are extremely excited. You have an incredible fan base.
Yeah, honestly, I can never talk about this enough. And anyone listening to this now that doesn't know me or my fans would just think that this is just another artist speaking another cliche about his fans. I'm telling you, this is what I call it. It's a codependency. Like they do so much for me and I do, you know, hopefully stuff for them when I do the gigs and stuff. But like when I feel the energy on stage, this is not a, let me show you all what I can do. This is a look what we've done together, you know, and I really, really feel that. The size of the venues that I'll be playing on this next tour, these are things I never considered for myself and only made possible from the fan base being like really, really loyal, but also like real patient for me to just kind of, you know, work all these things out on the fly while they keep buying the record.
The other thing that really surprised me that a lot of people didn't know about is that you are also a pretty prolific entrepreneur in your own right, and you've founded a music festival called the Away From Home Festival, which originally in London but has expanded internationally around Spain, Italy, Mexico. You got your clothing brand as well, 28. I saw 28 tattooed on your arm there, I believe, which is a streetwear brand, and that's done tremendously well. The brand has sold 4 sold-out drops worldwide and hosted some incredible events. Well, I'm very excited. I'm very, very excited about your album. I'm very, very excited by it. Do you have a name for your fan base yet? Everyone seems to have a name for their fans.
Do you know what? That's so funny because like
the Tomlinson. I don't know what's it.
There must be though. I think they call themselves the Louis.
The Louis.
Plural,
okay.
yeah.
So I'm a Louis. So
there we go. There we go. Just rolls off the tongue.
Yeah. We have a closing tradition on this podcast where the last guest leaves a question to the next guest, not knowing who they're leaving it for. And the question left for you, it's a bit of a paragraph, but I'm going to give it my best shot. If you are truly prioritizing the most important things in your life, brackets, e.g. family, and we only have limited time and effort to give, if you are a high achiever and performer, have you prioritized the most important thing?
No, I haven't. But I would. That's a really tough one to answer. It requires some true honesty. The things that really, really matter. For a start, I spent a lot of my later teen years and early adult life in One Direction. So I wasn't really in the headspace for the ball to have dropped for how important certain things are. When you're younger, you're super literal, right? Like if I drink this alcohol and get really drunk and I feel good, then that's good, right? Then you get a bit older and you realize, oh, maybe it's not so good. So like any of those kind of things, I suppose now I understand how important, looking out for yourself is and mental health, but also, I've always been a family guy, but I mean actually deeply cherishing those moments as well. So I definitely could have done that more as a young lad, but I think that's probably the case of a lot of young people, that they probably reflect and think, well, I should have done that more as a young person. But the truth is the ball hasn't really dropped yet. You don't realize how important all those little intricacies are, because also when you're young, everything's so new. So you just like the allure is so much sexier on the other side. Oh, look, there's a new thing here, new thing here, new thing here. Whereas I think it takes a bit of age and experience to look at those things and go, oh, actually, maybe I haven't been spending my time correctly.
Yeah. I mean, you said it perfectly. And it really held the mirror up to me, to be honest, because I think, you said you haven't perfectly prioritized the most important things, but you're certainly prioritizing them more than most people. Because I hear about how much effort you put into making sure you spend time with Freddie, and your sister described you as always being family centric. And that's a really, really beautiful thing. Louis, thank you so much. I can't be more excited to listen to the album with all the context that we've described, and also the understanding of where you've arrived at in your life now, and how your perspective has developed, and all that lived experience has poured into a beautifully uplifting, wonderful sound. So thank you so much for the honor and the privilege of being able to have this conversation with you, and just for being a really on and off camera, just a really, really sound guy.
Oh, nice one, man. I appreciate that. No, I really enjoyed it, man. It flew by though. We've been talking for some time. Yeah, it's good, man.
Thank you so much.